Hello everybody, welcome to a story that's gonna blow your mind. A tale so wild, so surreal, that it's kept me up at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering about the people who lived in a world we can barely imagine. If you're like me, someone who gets lost in the mysteries of the past, who feels a chill thinking about entire civilizations swallowed by time, then you're in the right place. Today we're diving into the lost civilization of the Sahara, a place that wasn't always the barren wasteland we know today. A deep dive into a forgotten world of rivers, lakes, and people who thrived where sand now rules. It's a story of beauty, tragedy, and questions that'll stick with you long after the video ends. So, if you're ready to go on this existential adventure with me to uncover a Sahara that was once a paradise, stick around. But fair warning, this tale might make you rethink everything you know about human history, and it might just break your heart a little. Let's get started. Picture the Sahara today. It's massive. 3.6 million square miles of scorching sand, jagged rocks, and air so dry it feels like it's sucking the life out of you. It's the largest hot desert on Earth, a place where temperatures can climb to 120 degrees C worse where rain is a myth, and where survival is a daily battle against the elements. If you've ever seen photos of the Sahara, it's almost alien endless dunes, cracked earth, and a silence so heavy it feels like the world's holding its breath. But here's the thing that'll stop you in your tracks. 10,000 years ago, this wasn't a desert at all. It was a lush green Eden. Savannas stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with grasslands, forests, and wetlands. Rivers carved through the landscape, feeding lakes so vast they could have rivaled Lake Michigan. Animals roamed here. Elephants, hippos, crocodiles, giraffes, even fish swarming in crystal clear waters. And people. Not just a few scattered nomads, but communities, maybe even cities, living, loving, and building lives in a place we now think of as unlivable. Can you imagine it? A Sahara teeming with life, where the air was thick with the buzz of insects and the calls of birds, where humans hunted, fished, and maybe even planted crops along fertile riverbanks. This wasn't a fantasy, it was real, and we've got the evidence to prove it. So, how do we know all this? Let's start with the fossils. Archaeologists and paleontologists have been digging in the Sahara for decades, and what they've found is staggering. In places like Niger, Chad, and Libya, they've unearthed bones of animals that have no business being in a desert. In the Tenere region of Niger, there's a site called Gobero, where researchers found skeletons of crocodiles, hippos, and fish, dating back to around 8,000 years ago. These weren't tiny minnows, we're talking big meaty fish like Nile perch, some over 6 feet long. They found turtle shells, antelope bones, and even giraffe remains, all in what's now one of the driest places on Earth. At a site in Libya called Tadrar Akakus, they dug up fossils of elephants and rhinos, animals that need water and grass to survive. These bones aren't just scattered, they're concentrated in areas that suggest ancient lakes and rivers, places where animals gathered to drink and graze. It's like finding a snapshot of a lost ecosystem, frozen in time under the sand. But it's not just bones. The real magic comes from something smaller, something you'd never think could tell us so much: pollen. Ancient pollen grains preserved in sediment cores pulled from dried up lake beds are like time capsules. Scientists drill deep into the earth, pull up these cores, and analyze the pollen under microscopes. What they've found in the Sahara is mind-blowing. Pollen from grasses, sedges, and even trees like acacia and baobab, all dating back to 10,000 and 5,000 years ago. This tells us the Sahara wasn't just a little greener, it was a full-on savanna, with patches of forest and wetlands. In Sudan, at a site called Lake Yoa, sediment cores show pollen from ferns and aquatic plants, proof that this region had standing water for thousands of years. These aren't guesses, this is hard science, showing us a Sahara that was alive, vibrant, and bursting with possibility. Now, let's talk about the human side. Because it's not just animals that thrived here, people did too. At Gobero, alongside those animal bones, archaeologists found human skeletons, some buried with care, adorned with jewelry made from hippo tusks and ostrich eggshells. These weren't random wanderers, they were part of communities that settled near water, maybe for generations. They left behind tools, stone blades, fishing hooks, pottery with intricate designs. In Algeria's Tassili Niger plateau, we found grinding stones, evidence that people were processing wild grains, maybe even experimenting with early farming. These folks weren't just surviving, they were building lives, creating cultures, leaving their mark. And here's where it gets haunting. We don't know who they were. Their names, their stories, their beliefs. They're gone, buried under millions of tons of sand. All we have are these fragments, these whispers of a world that vanished. This is where the existential questions start creeping in, and if you're like me, they hit hard. Who were these people? Did they have cities, temples, or markets? Were they telling stories around campfires, singing songs we'll never hear? And why did it all disappear? The Sahara's transformation from paradise to desert is one of the most dramatic shifts in human history, and it raises a question that's going to haunt us through this entire video. What happens when a civilization's world collapses? Did these people pack up and move, carrying their stories to new lands? Or did they fight to stay, clinging to a dying landscape until the sand claimed them? That's the mystery we're chasing, and it's not just about the past, it's about us too. Because if an entire civilization can vanish under the dunes, what's stopping ours from being next? Before we go further, I want to set the tone for this journey. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to explore the clues these people left behind. Strange cave art, forgotten empires, stone circles older than Stonehenge. We'll dig into the science from satellite scans to ancient star maps, and yeah, we'll even touch on some wild theories like aliens and Atlantis. But at its core, this is a story about humanity, about how we adapt, how we survive, and how we're forgotten. If that sounds like your kind of ride, stick with me. Next, we'll look at how modern tech is peeling back the sand to reveal the Sahara's secrets, and trust me, it's gonna get weirder. If you're still with me, we're knee-deep in one of the wildest stories I've ever come across. The lost civilization of the Sahara, a place that was once a green paradise, not the endless desert we know today. In part 1, we talked about the fossils and pollen that prove this region was buzzing with life 10,000 years ago. Elephants, hippos, fish, and people living in a lush savanna. But how do we see a world that's been buried under sand for millennia? That's where things get really cool and a little eerie. Today, in part 2, we're diving into how modern technology, satellites, radar, and some seriously high-tech wizardry is peeling back the Sahara's secrets. We're going to explore the African humid period, the climatic golden age that made the Sahara a garden, and start asking the big question, who were the people who lived here and where did they go? If you're ready to keep chasing this mystery, to feel the weight of a lost world coming back to life, then let's dive in. Let's start with the tech that's rewriting history, satellite imagery. If you've ever played around on Google Earth, zooming in on your house or some random mountain, imagine doing that for an entire desert the size of the United States. Since the 1970s, satellites like NASA's Landsat and the European Space Agency's Sentinel have been snapping pictures of the Sahara from hundreds of miles up. These aren't just pretty photos, they're data goldmines. By analyzing different wavelengths of light, scientists can see things invisible to the naked eye, like ancient riverbeds and lake basins buried under dunes. In the 1990s, a team using radar imagery from the space shuttle discovered a network of ghost rivers across the Sahara channels carved by water thousands of years ago, now filled with sand. One of the most famous is the Tamanrasset River in Algeria, a massive waterway that stretched over 300 miles, wider than the Nile in some places. They found it because radar can penetrate sand up to 15 feet deep, revealing the contours of river valleys that haven't seen water since before the pyramids were built. These satellite images don't just show rivers, they show entire landscapes. In Chad, there's a region called the Baudelaire Depression, now one of the dustiest places on Earth. But 8,000 years ago, it was home to Lake Mega Chad, a monster of a lake covering 140,000 square miles, bigger than the Caspian Sea, preserved like ripples in the sand. In Mauritania, they found traces of smaller lakes, some with fossilized fish bones still scattered along their edges. This isn't just random geography, it's proof that the Sahara was a network of waterways, connecting communities across what's now a wasteland. People fished, traded, and maybe even built towns along these shores. And satellites are showing us where to look for them, like a cosmic treasure map. But why was the Sahara so green? That brings us to the African humid period, a climatic anomaly that turned North Africa into a paradise from about 14,000 to 5,000 years ago. This wasn't just a wet spell, it was a complete transformation of the region, driven by a quirk in Earth's orbit called the Milankovitch cycles. Around 10,000 years ago, this tilt brought the northern hemisphere closer to the sun during summer, supercharging the African monsoon. Rain clouds pushed deep into the Sahara, watering grasslands, filling lakes, and creating a fertile belt from Senegal to Sudan. Scientists have modeled this using climate data from sediment cores, those same cores we talked about in part 1, packed with pollen and tiny shells of lake-dwelling creatures. At sites like Lake Yoa in Chad, these cores show a steady increase in rainfall starting around 14,000 years ago, peaking around 8,000 years ago when the Sahara was at its greenest. This wasn't a brief fluke. The African humid period lasted nearly 10,000 years, long enough for entire cultures to rise and flourish. Archaeologists have found evidence of human settlements all over the Sahara from this time. Campsites with fire pits, pottery shards, and tools made from flint and obsidian. In Niger's Air Mountains, they uncovered fishhooks and harpoons, proof that people were fishing in rivers that no longer exist. In Libya's Fezzan region, there are remains of villages with stone houses, some with grinding stones for processing wild grains. These weren't just hunter-gatherers. Some researchers think these people were experimenting with early agriculture, domesticating cattle or cultivating sorghum. Can you imagine it? A Sahara where herders drove cattle across grassy plains, where fishermen cast nets into sparkling lakes, where families gathered under acacia trees to share stories. But here's where it gets haunting. And if you're like me, this is the part that hits you in the gut. This paradise didn't last. Around 5,000 years ago, the Earth's wobble shifted again, the monsoons weakened, and the Sahara began to dry out. Lakes evaporated, rivers vanished, and the grasslands turned to dust. Entire ecosystems collapsed in a matter of centuries, maybe even decades. What happened to the people who lived there? Did they pack up and move, following the water to the Nile Valley or the Sahel? Did they fight to stay, watching their world die around them? Or did they leave something behind? Cities, temples, art that's still waiting to be found? That's the question that keeps me up at night. We've got fossils and pollen telling us the Sahara was green, satellites showing us where the rivers ran, but the human story is still a mystery. Who were these people? And what did they build before the sand swallowed it all? This is where our journey gets wilder. The Sahara's secrets aren't just in the ground, they're in the art, the ruins, and the strange structures that hint at a civilization we've forgotten. In the next part, we'll tease out that mystery, diving into the clues these people left behind and setting the stage for one of the strangest landmarks in the desert, the Eye of the Sahara. If you're as obsessed with this as I am, stick around, because it's about to get even crazier. But here's where it gets really haunting. And if you're like me, this is the part that sends a shiver down your spine. Who were these people? What did they build? What did they believe? And why did they vanish? In this final part of Chapter 1, we're going to tease the mystery of the Sahara's lost civilization, asking questions that'll stick with you for the rest of this 2-hour ride. And we're going to set the stage for something straight out of a sci-fi fever dream, a massive cosmic eye in the desert that might just hold the key to it all. So, if you're ready to chase this ghost story across the sands, let's dive in. This one's going to make you question everything. Let's start with the big picture. We know the Sahara was green, with rivers and lakes supporting human communities for thousands of years. But what kind of societies were they? Were they small bands of hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons? Or, and this is where my imagination starts running wild, could they have built something bigger? Cities, trade networks, maybe even temples or monuments? The evidence is tantalizing, but frustratingly incomplete. At sites like Gobero in Niger, archaeologists have found human burials from 8,000 years ago, some with jewelry made from ostrich eggshells and hippo tusks. These weren't just random graves, they were carefully arranged, suggesting rituals, beliefs, maybe even a sense of community that went beyond survival. There are grinding stones and pottery shards, hints that people were processing grains or storing foodstuffs towards settled life, maybe even early farming. In Libya's Fezzan region, there are traces of stone houses, fire pits, and tools made from obsidian, a volcanic glass that had to be traded over long distances. These aren't just campsites, they're signs of organized societies, people who knew their land and connected with others across it. But here's the kicker. We don't have the full picture. The Sahara's transformation into a desert around 5,000 years ago was brutal. As the rain stopped and the lakes dried up, entire communities were forced to adapt or die. Some likely migrated south to the Sahel or east to the Nile Valley, carrying their stories and skills with them. Others might have stayed, clinging to shrinking oases until the sand won. Either way, their world was erased, their cities, if they existed, buried under dunes. And that's what keeps me up at night. How much is still out there, hidden just beneath our feet? Every year, archaeologists find new clues. Pottery here, a spear point there. But it's like trying to solve a puzzle with 90% of the pieces missing. The Sahara is 3.6 million square miles, bigger than Australia. Imagine trying to search that for traces of a civilization that didn't have metal, didn't have writing, and didn't know the desert was coming. Now, let's talk about the clues we do have, because they're wild. In the coming chapters, we're going to explore some of the strangest relics of the Sahara's past. There's cave art in Algeria that looks like it was painted by aliens, humanoid figures with helmets, floating beings, scenes that make you wonder what these people were seeing. Now, let's talk about the clues we do have, because they're wild. There's an empire called the Garamantes in modern Libya, who built pyramids and irrigation systems in the desert, trading with Rome like it was no big deal. And there are stone circles, older than Stonehenge, aligned with the stars in ways that scream early astronomy. These aren't just random artifacts, they're hints of a sophisticated culture, maybe even multiple cultures, that thrived in a Sahara we can barely comprehend. But the desert didn't just erase their buildings, it erased their memory. Unlike the Egyptians, who left us pyramids and hieroglyphs, or the Mesopotamians with their clay tablets, these people left fragments. And yet, those fragments are enough to make you wonder, were they the ancestors of the civilizations we do know? Did their stories become the myths of Egypt, or the legends of Atlantis? This brings us to the existential heart of this story, and if you're like me, it's the part that hits hardest. The Sahara's lost civilizations aren't just a historical puzzle, they're a warning. These people lived in a paradise, built lives, maybe even dreamed of a future, and then their world collapsed. Not because of war or greed, but because the climate turned against them. In a few centuries, their rivers dried up, their crops failed, and their homes became tombs. Sound familiar? We're facing our own climate challenges today. Rising temperatures, shrinking water supplies, ecosystems on the brink. If an entire civilization could vanish from the Sahara, leaving only bones and whispers, what's stopping ours from fading into the dust? This isn't just a story about the past, it's a mirror, showing us how fragile our world is, how easily we could become the next forgotten chapter. And now, we're about to take a sharp turn into the weird. There's a place in the Sahara that looks like it doesn't belong. A massive, circular formation that astronauts spotted from space, so strange it's been called the Eye of the Sahara. It's called the Richat structure, and it's our next stop. Is it just a geological quirk, or could it be a clue to a lost civilization? Some even say it's the real Atlantis. Yeah, I know, that sounds out there, but stick with me. Hold on to your hats, because we're about to dive into one of the strangest, most jaw-dropping mysteries of the Sahara. Picture this. You're an astronaut in the 1960s, orbiting Earth, looking down at a sea of sand, and then, bam, you spot it. A giant, perfect circle, etched into the desert like a cosmic bullseye, staring back at you from the middle of nowhere. This is the Richat structure, also called the Eye of the Sahara. And if you've never seen it, trust me, it's the kind of thing that makes you question reality. It's 25 miles across, a series of concentric rings that look like they were drawn by a giant with a compass. And here's the kicker. It's in the Sahara, a place we know was once a lush paradise, home to people who left behind clues of a lost world. Is this just a freak of nature, or could it be something more, a remnant of a civilization we've forgotten? Let's zoom in on this desert enigma and figure out what the heck it is. The Richat structure sits in the middle of Mauritania, in a region so remote it makes the moon look accessible. It's about 600 miles northeast of Dakar, surrounded by nothing but dunes and rocky plateaus. From the ground, you'd barely notice it. It's too big to take in. But from space, it's unmistakable, a series of concentric rings like ripples in a pond, with a central dome rising slightly above the desert floor. The outer ring is about 25 miles wide, and the inner rings get progressively smaller, creating a hypnotic pattern that's almost too perfect to be natural. When astronauts first spotted it during early space missions, they were floored. It didn't look like a mountain or a crater. It looked designed. And that's when the questions started. Is this a geological quirk? A meteor impact? Or, dare I say it, something built by human hands, maybe even a clue to a lost civilization? Let's get to the science first, because the mainstream explanation is pretty solid, even if it doesn't satisfy the dreamer in me. Geologists call the Richat structure a domed anticline, which sounds like something from a sci-fi novel but is actually a well-understood phenomenon. Picture the Earth's crust as layers of rock, like a stack of pancakes. About 100 million years ago, tectonic forces in this part of the Sahara pushed these layers upward, creating a dome-like bulge. Over millions of years, wind and water eroded the softer rocks, carving away the top layers and leaving behind these concentric rings of harder stone. The center of the structure is made of ancient volcanic rock breccia, to be precise, while the rings are composed of sedimentary layers, like sandstone and limestone, each eroding at different rates. That's why it looks so symmetrical. The harder rocks held their shape while the softer ones wore away, creating this natural bullseye. Radiometric dating of the rocks puts them at about 100 million years old, from the Cretaceous period way before humans were even a twinkle in evolution's eye. There's no evidence of a meteor impact, like shocked quartz or a deep crater, which rules out the idea that it's an asteroid scar. And the symmetry? That's just geology being weirdly perfect, like the hexagonal columns of the Giant's Causeway in Ireland or the wave-like dunes of the Namib Desert. In 2011, a team from the University of Lisbon used satellite data and ground surveys to confirm the anticline theory, mapping the rock layers in detail. Their conclusion, the Richat structure is a natural formation, a product of millions of years of tectonic uplift and erosion, nothing more. But here's where my skeptic's brain starts to itch. And if you're like me, you're feeling it too. The Richat structure is too perfect. Most geological formations are messy, jagged, irregular, chaotic. This thing looks like it was drawn with a ruler. And it's not just the shape, it's the location. Satellite imagery has shown ancient river channels flowing toward the Richat structure, suggesting it might have been an oasis or lake back then. Could it have been a focal point for human activity? A sacred site, a trading hub, or even a city? The surrounding region, called the Adrar Plateau, has yielded artifacts, stone tools, pottery, even human burials, dating to the Green Sahara. These people were here, living near the Richat structure when it was surrounded by water and grass. Doesn't that make you wonder? If you were building a settlement, wouldn't you pick a spot as striking as this? A giant, natural landmark visible for miles? Now, I'm not saying aliens built it or anything crazy yet, but the Richat structure's eerie perfection and its place in a once lush Sahara make it a magnet for speculation. It's the kind of thing that grabs you by the imagination and doesn't let go. Could it have been a beacon for a lost civilization? A place where people gathered, built, and dreamed? Or is it just a geological fluke, mocking us with its symmetry? That's what we're going to dig into next, as we explore the wildest theory of all. Could the Eye of the Sahara be the lost city of Atlantis? Yeah, I know, it sounds like something from a late-night conspiracy podcast, but stick with me. The clues are there, and they're about to get weirder. We're standing at the edge of the Richat structure, this massive cosmic bullseye in the Sahara that looks like it was etched by some ancient architect. It's 25 miles wide, perfectly circular, and sitting in a desert that was once a green paradise, teeming with rivers, lakes, and people. Last time, we unpacked the science. It's a geological formation, a domed anticline carved by millions of years of erosion. But there's a theory out there, one that's wild enough to make even a skeptic like me pause and wonder, could the Eye of the Sahara be the lost city of Atlantis? Yes, that Atlantis, the mythical island from Plato's dialogues, a place of advanced civilization swallowed by catastrophe. It sounds like something you'd hear on a late-night conspiracy podcast, but stick with me. There are clues here that make this idea weirdly compelling, even if they don't hold up under scrutiny. Let's explore the Atlantis theories, weigh their plausibility, and see if this desert enigma could be hiding a lost world. First, let's go back to the source of the Atlantis myth. Around 360 BCE, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote about a great civilization in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He described Atlantis as a powerful, advanced society on a circular island with concentric rings of land and water, surrounded by mountains and a fertile plain. It was a utopia of sorts, rich, technologically sophisticated, with grand temples and canals. But, Plato said, Atlantis fell out of favor with the gods, and around 9,600 BCE, roughly 11,500 years ago, it was destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods sinking into the sea. For centuries, scholars thought Plato made it all up, a fictional allegory about hubris and the fall of empires. But others, archaeologists, historians, and, yeah, some fringe theorists have wondered if Atlantis was based on a real place, a distant memory of a lost civilization. Now, enter the Richat structure. When astronauts first spotted it in the 1960s, its eerie symmetry sparked curiosity, but it wasn't until the internet age that the Atlantis theory took off. In 2008, a YouTuber named George Alexander posted a video pointing out similarities between the Richat structure and Plato's description. The video went viral, and suddenly, the Eye of the Sahara was at the center of a global debate. Here's why people got excited. Plato said Atlantis was about 127 stadia across, roughly 23 miles. The Richat structure? about 25 miles wide, close enough to raise eyebrows. Plato described concentric rings of land and water. The Richat has those perfect rings, and we know from satellite data that ancient rivers flowed toward it during the Green Sahara, possibly filling the rings with water. Plato placed Atlantis near mountains and a plain. The Richat sits in the Adrar Plateau with low mountains nearby and a flat desert that could have been a fertile plain 10,000 years ago. And the timing? Plato's 9600 BCE catastrophe lines up roughly with the end of the African humid period, when the Sahara began drying out around 5,000 years ago. It's intriguing, right? But let's pump the brakes and look at the other side. The mainstream archaeological community is, to put it mildly, not buying it. For one, Plato said Atlantis was an island in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most scholars interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. The Richat structure is landlocked, deep in the Sahara, hundreds of miles from any ocean. Sure, it might have been near a lake or river system, but that's a stretch from sunk into the sea. Then there's the age problem. The Richat's rocks are 100 million years old, and while the formation itself is geological, any human activity would have happened much later, during the Green Sahara. But Plato's 9600 BCE date is tricky. Most archaeologists believe no advanced civilizations existed that early, at least not with the temples and canals Plato described. The earliest known complex societies, like those in Mesopotamia or Egypt, date to around 3000 BCE, thousands of years later. Another issue is the lack of archaeological evidence. If the Richat was a city, where are the ruins? No temples, walls, or canals have been found, just stone tools and pottery from nearby sites, typical of Neolithic hunter-gatherers. Fringe theorists argue that sand could have buried everything, but ground surveys and radar scans haven't turned up anything definitive, and Plato's story itself is suspect. Many scholars think it was inspired by real events closer to home, like the Minoan eruption on Santorini around 1600 BCE, which destroyed a Mediterranean civilization. The Richat's similarities could be coincidence, our brains seeing patterns where none exist, like seeing faces in clouds. In 2018, a study by the Geological Society of America reiterated that the Richat is a natural formation, with no signs of human modification. The Atlantis theory, they say, is more wishful thinking than science. But here's where I get that itch, that nagging feeling that keeps me up at night. Even if the Richat isn't Atlantis, it's still weird. Its symmetry, its location in a once lush Sahara, the way it seems to draw you in, it's like a cosmic signal. We know people lived here during the African humid period. They left behind artifacts, burials, even early art nearby. Could the Richat have been a focal point for them, a natural landmark they revered or built around? Not a golden city like Plato's Atlantis, but maybe a sacred site, a gathering place, a hub for trade? The lack of ruins doesn't mean nothing was there. Sand is a brutal eraser, and we've only scratched the surface of the Sahara's 3.6 million square miles. If a civilization did thrive here, could their story have traveled, becoming a myth that Plato heard thousands of years later? This is where the Atlantis theory, even if it's shaky, gets under your skin. It's not just about whether the Richat matches Plato's story, it's about what it represents. A lost world, a civilization that could have been great, wiped out by a changing climate, leaving only whispers in the sand. If you're like me, that idea hits hard. It makes you wonder, how many other stories have we lost? How many cultures vanished before they could leave a record? Next, we're going to explore how the Richat fits into the Green Sahara's human story, and whether it held a deeper meaning for the people who walked its rings. This mystery's far from over, and it's about to get even wilder. Let's rewind to the Sahara we've been dreaming about, a time when this desert was a vibrant savanna, crisscrossed with rivers and dotted with lakes. From about 14,000 to 5,000 years ago, during the African humid period, North Africa was a Garden of Eden. We know this from fossils of hippos and fish, pollen from grasses and trees, and satellite images showing ghost rivers snaking through what's now sand. The Richat structure sat right in the middle of this green world, in what's now Mauritania's Adrar Plateau. Back then, it wasn't surrounded by dunes, it was likely encircled by water. Satellite data has revealed ancient river channels flowing toward the Richat, some forming moat-like patterns around its rings. There's evidence of a paleolake, a massive body of water nearby, fed by these rivers during the wettest parts of the humid period. Imagine it, the Richat's concentric rings, shimmering with water, reflecting a sky full of monsoon clouds, surrounded by grasslands where antelope grazed and people gathered. It must have been breathtaking, a natural landmark landmark that dominated the landscape. So, what did this mean for the people who lived here? We know from archaeological sites across the Sahara that humans thrived during this time. In Mauritania's Adrar region, not far from the Richat, researchers have found stone tools, flint arrowheads, scrapers, even fishhooks, dating to 8,000, 6,000 years ago. These weren't just random nomads, they were communities that fished, hunted, and possibly herded cattle. At a site called a Mogjar, about 100 miles from the Richat, archaeologists uncovered pottery shards and grinding stones, signs of settled life or at least seasonal camps. There are even human burials, some with beads and ornaments suggesting rituals and a sense of identity. The Richat structure, with its striking symmetry and commanding presence, would have been impossible to ignore. It's not hard to imagine it as a focal point, a place where people came to trade, worship, or just marvel at its beauty. Here's where it gets fascinating, and if you're like me, this is the part that makes your heart race. The Richat's cultural significance doesn't require it to be Atlantis. It could have been a sacred site, like Uluru in Australia or Stonehenge in England, natural formations that humans imbued with meaning. The concentric rings, visible even from the ground, might have symbolized something cosmic, like the cycles of life or the movement of the stars. We know from later Saharan cultures, like the Garamantes, that water was revered in this region, often tied to spiritual beliefs. A lake-filled Richat could have been seen as a gift from the gods, a place of pilgrimage where people offered gifts or performed ceremonies. There's no direct evidence of this yet, no altars or carvings, but the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The Sahara's sand is a master at hiding secrets, and we've only explored a fraction of it. There's another angle to consider, the Richat as a hub for trade or community. During the Green Sahara, rivers and lakes connected far-flung groups, creating networks across North Africa. The Richat's location, near ancient waterways, would have made it a natural gathering spot. Think of it like a desert crossroads, where herders from the south met fishermen from the north, trading obsidian tools for dried fish or cattle hides for pottery. Archaeological sites in the Adrar Plateau show obsidian, a volcanic glass that was sourced from hundreds of miles away, proof that these people were mobile and connected. The Richat's rings could have served as a landmark, a way to navigate the vast savanna, like a prehistoric GPS. Imagine a trader squinting across the grasslands, spotting those rings and knowing they were close to water, safety, and people. It's a powerful image, one that makes these ancient Saharans feel so human, so real. But here's the gut punch, the part that hits me hardest. This green world didn't last. Around 5,000 years ago, the Sahara began to dry out, the rivers vanished, and the Richat's lakes evaporated. Whatever role it played, sacred site, trading hub, or just a beautiful oddity, was lost as the sand took over. The people who gathered here, who maybe saw the eye of the Sahara as the center of their world, were forced to leave or perish. Their stories, their rituals, their lives, they faded into the dunes, and that's what makes the Richat so haunting. It's not just a geological wonder, it's a symbol of everything we've lost. Could their memory have survived in myths, passed down through generations until they reached Plato or the early Egyptians? Could the Richat's rings have inspired tales of a great circular city, now buried under sand instead of sea? This is where the story of the Richat structure leaves us, caught between science and imagination, between what we know and what we dream. It's a geological marvel, yes, but it's also a window into a lost world, a place where people lived, loved, and maybe worshipped in a Sahara that's gone forever. If you're as captivated by this as I am, stick around, because the Sahara's secrets are just starting to unfold. The Eye of the Sahara had us dreaming of sacred sites, and maybe even Atlantis, but now we're following those ancient waterways to something even more tantalizing, hidden cities swallowed by the sand. The idea of entire settlements buried out there, waiting to be found, is enough to keep you up at night, wondering who these people were and what they left behind. In this part, we're diving into the ancient river systems that once connected the Sahara's communities and the cutting-edge tech, like LiDAR, that's helping us uncover their secrets. This is where the past starts to feel alive, like we're on the verge of finding something big. So, let's hit the ground running and follow the ghost rivers of the Sahara to see where they lead. Picture the Sahara 10,000 years ago. A lush savanna buzzing with life. Rivers carved through the landscape, feeding lakes and watering grasslands where elephants roamed and people built their lives. These weren't just trickles, we're talking major waterways, some rivaling the Nile. One of the most incredible is the Tamanrasset River in Algeria, a massive channel that stretched over 300 miles, wider than many modern rivers. It flowed from the Atlas Mountains to the heart of the Sahara, creating a lifeline for plants, animals, and humans. Another network, the Wadi Tanazuft in Libya, connected oases and lakes across what's now a barren wasteland. These rivers weren't isolated, they formed a web, linking communities across thousands of miles, from modern-day Mauritania to Sudan. How do we know this? Because satellites and radar have given us a window into a world long gone. The key to finding these rivers is technology that sees what our eyes can't. Satellites like NASA's Landsat and the European Space Agency's Sentinel use radar and infrared imaging to peer beneath the sand. In the 1980s, the space shuttle's SIR, a radar mission, made a game-changing discovery. It detected ancient riverbeds buried up to 15 feet deep, their contours preserved like fossils. The Tamanrasset River showed up as a ghostly outline, its path traceable across Algeria's desert. In Chad, radar revealed the ancient shorelines of Lake Mega Chad, a 140,000 square mile monster that dwarfed modern lakes. These images aren't just pretty pictures. They're maps of a lost ecosystem showing where water flowed and where people likely settled. Along these riverbeds, archaeologists have found stone tools, pottery, and fish hooks, proof that humans were using these waterways to hunt, fish, and maybe even trade. But the real game changer is LiDAR light detection and ranging. If you haven't heard of LiDAR, picture a laser scanner mounted on a plane or drone, firing millions of pulses to create a 3D map of the ground below. It can strip away vegetation, sand, and even time, revealing features hidden for millennia. In the Sahara, LiDAR is still in its early days, but it's already turning heads. In 2019, a team from the University of Leicester used LiDAR in Libya's Fezzan region to map ancient river channels and potential settlement sites. They found patterns of human activity clusters of stone structures and middens, basically ancient trash piles, along the Wadi Tanazuft. These weren't random camps, they were organized, possibly permanent villages. In Mauritania's Adrar Plateau, near the Richat structure, LiDAR scans have hinted at buried features, rectangular shapes that could be walls or foundations, though excavation is needed to confirm. What makes LiDAR so exciting is its precision. Unlike traditional archaeology, where you're digging blindly, LiDAR gives you a roadmap. In the Sahara, where sandstorms can bury a site in hours, that's a lifesaver. One stunning find came in 2021 when a team in Niger used LiDAR to map the Air Mountains, uncovering a network of terraces and stone enclosures along ancient streams. These could be early agricultural sites where people managed water to grow crops or graze cattle. The data suggests settlements were clustered along rivers, forming what might have been trade routes or even proto-cities. Imagine it, a network of villages linked by water with boats carrying goods. Obsidian from the mountains, fish from the lakes, maybe even jewelry made from shells or ivory. It's a glimpse of a Sahara that wasn't just surviving but thriving, a place where people built complex lives before the desert took over. But here's the part that gets me, the part that makes this story feel so human and so tragic. These rivers, these lifelines, are gone. Around 5,000 years ago, the African humid period ended and the Sahara dried up. The Tamanrasset River became a sandy scar. The people who depended on these waterways faced a choice, move, or die. Some likely headed south to the Sahel or east to the Nile, carrying their tools and stories. Others might have stayed, clinging to shrinking oases until the sand won. And with them went their settlements, their homes, maybe entire cities we haven't found yet. LiDAR is giving us hope, showing us where to look, but it's also a reminder of how much we've lost. This is where the mystery deepens, and if you're like me, it's the kind that makes your heart ache. If there were cities along these rivers, where are they? Are they buried under dunes, waiting for us to find them? Or did they crumble to dust, leaving only whispers in the sand? If you're ready to keep chasing this ghost story, stick with me. It's about to get even more incredible. Picture this. You're standing in a landscape of towering cliffs and hidden caves, where the echoes of a lost civilization are carved into the rock itself. This is Tadjart Akakus, a rugged mountain range in southern Libya where some of the most incredible clues to the Sahara's past are hiding. If you're like me, the idea of stumbling across ancient ruins in a place this remote, this unforgiving, makes your heart race. We followed ghost rivers and LiDAR maps to find where people lived in the Green Sahara, but now we're zooming in on Tadjart Akakus, a place that might hold the key to lost cities and the trade routes that connected them. This is where the past starts to feel like a story we're only just beginning to read. So let's dive into these ruins and dream about the highways of an ancient world. Trust me, this is gonna blow your mind. Tadjart Akakis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a maze of sandstone cliffs, canyons, and wadis dry riverbeds that once carried water through the Sahara. 10,000 years ago, during the African humid period, this wasn't a barren wasteland. It was a lush oasis, with wetlands, lakes, and rivers teeming with life. Archaeologists have found evidence of this everywhere. Fossilized fish bones, hippo remains, even pollen from reeds and ferns, proof that this was a green, watery paradise. But what makes Tadjart Akakis special isn't just the environment, it's the human story etched into its rocks. This place is famous for its rock art, thousands of paintings and engravings that date back to 12,000, 6,000 years ago. These aren't just doodles, they're snapshots of a thriving culture, showing hunters with bows, women gathering plants, and cattle herders driving their flocks. Some scenes even depict boats, suggesting people navigated the rivers that once flowed here. The ruins themselves are just as compelling. Scattered across Tadjart Akakis are stone structures, circular foundations, walls, and what look like storage pits dating to the Green Sahara. These aren't grand palaces like you'd find in Egypt, but they're significant. At a site called Yuan Amil, archaeologists uncovered clusters of stone huts, some with hearths and grinding stones for processing wild grain. Nearby, they found pottery shards decorated with intricate patterns, suggesting a culture with time for art and craftsmanship. There are also burial sites, with human remains buried alongside beads made from ostrich eggshells and shells from distant lakes, hinting at trade or travel. These ruins aren't isolated, they're spread across the region, often near ancient riverbeds, suggesting settlements that relied on water for survival. Could these be the remnants of villages, or even something bigger? This brings us to the trade route hypothesis. The Sahara's rivers, like the Tamanrasset or Wadi Tanezeft, didn't just provide water, they were highways, connecting communities across thousands of miles. Tadjart Akakis, with its strategic location in southern Libya, was perfectly positioned to be a hub in this network. Archaeologists have found evidence of trade here. Obsidian tools sourced from volcanic regions hundreds of miles away, shells from lakes that no longer exist, even early forms of pottery that match styles found in Niger and Chad. In 2015, a team from the University of Cambridge excavated a site near Tadjart Akakis and found evidence of cattle herding, with bones showing signs of long-distance movement, proof that people were mobile, possibly driving herds along river routes. This wasn't just local exchange, it suggests a complex network, with Tadjart Akakis as a key node. Picture it. Boats gliding along a river, loaded with baskets of grain or bundles of hides, stopping at Tadjart Akakis to trade with locals living in stone huts. The cliffs provided shelter from the sun, the rivers offered fish and water, and the rock art tells us this was a place of cultural significance, maybe even a meeting point for rituals or markets. Some researchers hypothesize that these routes stretched from the Mediterranean coast to the Sahel, linking the Sahara's people with distant cultures. There's even evidence of early contact with the Nile Valley pottery styles and stone tools in Tadjart Akakis share similarities with those found in early Egyptian sites, hinting at connections that predate the pyramids. But here's the heartbreaking part, the part that hits me like a punch to the gut. This world didn't last. Around 5,000 years ago, the Sahara's climate shifted, the rivers dried up, and places like Tadjart Akakis became uninhabitable. The rock art is still there, preserved by the dry desert air, but the lives behind it are gone. And that's what makes Tadjart Akakis so haunting. It's not just a collection of ruins, it's a window into a culture we barely understand, a civilization that might have been as complex as any we know, erased by a changing world. Were these the seeds of a lost city, or just scattered villages? Did their trade routes carry their stories to other lands, shaping the cultures that came after? This is where the story gets frustrating, and if you're like me, it's the kind of frustration that fuels your obsession. The Sahara is vast, 3.6 million square miles, and finding these ruins is like searching for a needle in a sandstorm. The clues at Tadjart Akakis are incredible, but they're only a piece of the puzzle. Are there bigger settlements out there, buried under dunes, waiting for us to find them? Or is the desert too good at keeping its secrets? If you're ready to keep chasing this mystery, stick with me. We've explored Tadjart Akakis, with its haunting rock art and ruins hinting at villages or even cities along ancient waterways. But here's the part that gets me, the part that feels like a punch to the gut. Finding these places is insanely hard. The Sahara is 3.6 million square miles of sand, heat, and secrets. and it's not giving up its treasures easily. If you're like me, the idea of entire cities buried out there, waiting to be uncovered, is both thrilling and frustrating. In this part, we're diving into the challenges of finding these hidden cities, why it's so tough, what's standing in our way, and why every discovery feels like a miracle. Let's dig in, but fair warning, this is where the Sahara shows us just how good it is at keeping its past hidden. First, let's talk about the sheer scale of the problem. The Sahara is massive, bigger than Australia, stretching across 11 countries, from Morocco to Sudan. Imagine trying to find a handful of ancient settlements in a landscape that size, where dunes can tower hundreds of feet high and shift overnight in a sandstorm. Most of the Sahara's surface is covered in sand or rocky reg, a crust of gravel that hides what's beneath. The green Sahara's rivers and lakes, where people likely built their lives, are now buried under layers of sediment, sometimes 10 to 20 feet deep, even when we know where to look, thanks to satellite radar showing ancient riverbeds or LiDAR mapping potential ruins. We're talking about excavating in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Temperatures hit 120 degrees Forf in the day and plummet at night. Water is scarce, and sandstorms can erase your progress in hours. Then there's the problem of preservation, or lack thereof. Unlike Egypt, where the dry climate preserved pyramids and mummies, the Sahara's green period was wet, and that moisture didn't always play nice with artifacts. Wooden tools, textiles, even bones can decay in humid conditions, and when the Sahara dried up around 5,000 years ago, wind and sand ground down what was left. At sites like Tajar Akakis, we've found stone huts and rock art, but anything more complex, like city walls or large structures, could be pulverized or covered by dune. In 2017, a team excavating in Niger's Tenere Desert found promising signs of a settlement: stone foundations, hearths, pottery, but a single storm buried the site before they could finish. The desert doesn't just hide history, it destroys it. Another huge challenge is access. The Sahara isn't just a physical obstacle, it's a political one. Many of the most promising sites are in regions plagued by instability. Libya, home to Tadrat Akakis, has been mired in conflict since 2011, making archaeological work dangerous or impossible. Mali and Niger face similar issues, with security risks limiting expedition. Even when teams get permission, logistics are a nightmare. You need vehicles, fuel, and supplies to survive weeks in the desert, and local governments often lack the resources to support large-scale digs. In 2020, a planned LiDAR survey in southern Algeria was canceled due to border disputes and safety concerns. These aren't just inconveniences, they're barriers that keep entire swaths of the Sahara unexplored, leaving potential cities locked away. Technology, while a game changer, has its limits too. LiDAR and satellite radar can map buried rivers and spot potential ruins, but they can't dig for you. A 2019 study in Mauritania used LiDAR to identify rectangular shapes near ancient riverbeds, possible foundations, but ground truthing revealed only scattered stones, not a city. And even when you find something real, excavation is slow and expensive. A single site can take years to uncover, and funding is tight. Most archaeological budgets go to well-known sites like Egypt's pyramids, not speculative hunts in the Sahara. In 2022, a team from the University of Oxford estimated that less than 1% of the Sahara's potential archaeological sites have been systematically explored. 1%, that's how little we know about this vast desert's past. Then there's the human factor, and this is where it gets personal for me. The people who lived in the Green Sahara didn't have writing, at least not that we've found. They left no texts, no records to guide us. Their cities, if they existed, were likely built from mud, wood, or stone, materials that don't stand up to 5,000 years of desertification. Unlike the Romans or Egyptians, who left monumental ruins, these people's legacy is subtle pottery shards, a few rock paintings, a scattering of tools. It's like trying to reconstruct a novel from a handful of torn pages. In 2018, a team in Chad's Enadai Plateau found a cluster of stone structures near a paleo lake, with grinding stones and fish bones suggesting a fishing village. It's not a city, but it's a hint, a whisper of something bigger. These discoveries keep archaeologists going, even when the odds are stacked against them. This is where the existential weight of this story hits, and if you're like me, it's the kind that makes you pause. The Sahara's lost cities aren't just hard to find, they're a reminder of how fragile human history is. These people lived, loved, built communities, maybe even dreamed of a future, and then their world turned to dust. The desert didn't just bury their homes, it buried their stories. their names, their very existence. And yet, we keep searching, driven by the hope that there's more out there. Maybe a city, maybe a culture, maybe a piece of ourselves. As we move into the next chapter, we're going to explore some of the strangest clues yet. Cave paintings in Tassili Najer that look like they were drawn by aliens. If you're ready to keep digging through the Sahara's secrets, stick with me. This journey is about to get weirder. We followed ancient waterways and uncovered ruins that hint at lost cities, but now we're stepping into a place that feels like it's straight out of a dream, or maybe a sci-fi movie. This is Tassili Najer, a remote plateau in southeastern Algeria, where the rocks themselves tell a story. Then you're in for a treat. In this part, we're diving into the Tassili Najer cave paintings, a gallery of the Sahara's past that's as beautiful as it is mysterious. Let's explore these windows to a lost world and see what they reveal about the people who called this place home. Tassili Najer is a geological wonder, a sprawling plateau of sandstone cliffs, canyons, and natural rock shelters in the heart of the Sahara. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, covering over 27,000 square miles, and it's one of the most remote places you can imagine. Think endless dunes giving way to jagged peaks baked by the sun. But 12,000 to 6,000 years ago, during the African humid period, this wasn't a desert wasteland. It was a lush savanna with rivers flowing through the valleys, lakes shimmering under the sky, and grasslands teeming with antelope, elephants, and crocodiles. Fossils and pollen from the region confirm it. This was a paradise where people hunted, fished, and maybe even started farming. And they left behind something extraordinary: over 15,000 rock paintings and engravings scattered across thousands of caves and shelters, preserved by the desert's dry air. These aren't just scratches on a wall, they're a time capsule, a direct line to the minds of people who lived in a Sahara we can barely fathom. The cave paintings of Tassili Najer were first documented in the 1930s by French ethnologist Henri Lotte, who led expeditions into the plateau and was floored by what he found. These artworks date back to the Neolithic period, roughly 12,000 to 4,000 years ago, and they cover a staggering range of styles and subjects. Some show everyday life hunters chasing gazelles with bows, women gathering plants, herders guiding cattle through grassy plains. Others depict animals in vivid detail: giraffes with long necks, rhinos charging, even fish swimming in rivers that no longer exist. The colors, reds, yellows, whites, and blacks come from natural pigments like ochre and charcoal, applied with such skill they still pop against the rock. Some paintings are massive, covering entire cave walls, while others are tiny, intimate sketches tucked into corners. It's like walking into an ancient gallery, where every image tells a story of survival, community, and maybe even wonder. What makes Tassili Najer so special is the sheer scale and variety of the art. This isn't one cave with a few drawings, it's thousands of sites, some hidden deep in canyons, others perched on cliffs. Archaeologists divide the art into periods based on style and subject. The earliest, from around 12,000 to 8,000 years ago, are called the Round Head period, named for the strange, circular-headed figures that dominate these paintings. These aren't your typical stick figures. They're ethereal, almost otherworldly, with rounded heads and elongated bodies, sometimes floating or surrounded by abstract shapes. Later periods, like the Bovidian phase around 7,000 years ago, focus on cattle herding, showing the shift to pastoral life as the Sahara began to dry. The art evolves over time, reflecting changes in the environment and culture, like a visual diary of a civilization adapting to a changing world. But here's where it gets wild, and if you're like me, this is the part that sends your imagination into overdrive. Some of these paintings don't look like anything we'd expect from Neolithic people. There are figures with what look like helmets or masks, others that seem to be floating in midair, and scenes that feel like rituals or ceremonies we can't quite decode. These images have sparked debates that range from fascinating to downright out there. Were these the work of ancient ancestors, capturing their daily lives and beliefs? Or, and I know this sounds crazy, could they be evidence of something stranger, like contact with beings from another world? Yeah, I'm skeptical too, but the weirdness of these paintings is undeniable. They're not just art, they're a puzzle, a glimpse into the minds of people who saw the world in ways we're only beginning to understand. This is where Tassili Najer grabs you by the heart and doesn't let go. These paintings aren't just pretty pictures, They're voices from a lost civilization, shouting across millennia. The people who made them lived in a Sahara that was alive, vibrant, and full of possibility. But as the desert crept in, their world vanished, leaving only these images to tell their story. Who were they? What did they believe? And why do some of their paintings look so strange? In the next part, we're going to zoom in on the most enigmatic figures, the humanoid shapes and ritual scenes that have everyone talking, and try to figure out what they mean. If you're ready to dive deeper into this mystery, stick with me. It's about to get even weirder. We're standing in the heart of the Sahara, inside a cave in Tassili, Niger, where the walls are alive with the stories of a lost world. These ancient paintings, created when the Sahara was a green paradise, are like a portal to a civilization we barely understand, a people who hunted, herded, and thrived here thousands of years ago. But some of these images are so strange, so otherworldly, they make you stop and stare. In this part, we're zooming in on the most enigmatic part of Tassili's rock art, the humanoid figures and ritual scenes that have everyone talking. Are these depictions of everyday life, spiritual ceremonies, or something weirder? Let's step into this ancient gallery and see what these figures are trying to tell us. Trust me, this is going to spark your imagination. Picture yourself in a rock shelter, deep in the rugged cliffs of Tassili, Niger, southeastern Algeria. The air is cool, the walls are rough sandstone, and everywhere you look there are paintings, thousands of them, stretching across the rock like a storybook. These artworks, dating from 12,000 to 4,000 years ago, capture a Sahara that was lush with rivers and grasslands. While many show familiar scenes, hunters with bows, cattle herders, women gathering plants, some stand out for their sheer weirdness. These are the round-head figures, named for their large circular heads, often painted in red or white ochre. They're not your typical stick figures. They're tall, elongated, sometimes floating or surrounded by abstract shapes, with features that don't quite look human. Some have what appear to be helmets or masks. Others have oversized eyes or no facial features at all, and a few seem to be dancing or gesturing in ways that scream ceremony or ritual. Let's dive into some of these figures, because they're absolutely haunting. One famous painting, found at a site called Sahara, shows a group of round-head figures standing in a line, their arms raised as if in a dance or prayer. They're over 6 feet tall in the painting, with rounded heads and no mouths, their bodies adorned with patterns that could be clothing or body paint. Nearby, there's a figure dubbed the Great God by early explorers, a massive humanoid shape with a horned or helmeted head surrounded by smaller figures that seem to be bowing or offering something. The scene feels like a ritual, maybe a ceremony to honor a deity or ancestor. Another painting, at Tin Tazarift, shows a figure with a helmet-like head and what looks like a suit, floating above the ground, surrounded by wavy lines that could be water, smoke, or something symbolic. These images aren't just art, they're stories, maybe myths. Then there are the ritual scenes. And these are where things get even more intriguing. Some paintings depict groups of figures in what look like ceremonial gatherings. At a site called Jabaran, there's a scene of women with raised arms, their bodies painted with geometric patterns, surrounded by smaller figures that might be children or attendants. It feels like a dance or a rite, maybe tied to fertility or the harvest. Another painting shows a figure holding what could be a staff or a ceremonial object, standing over a group of animals, cattle, antelope, even a lion, as if leading a ritual sacrifice or invocation. These scenes are rich with detail. Some figures wear elaborate headgear, others have belts or sashes, and the animals are often painted with such care they seem alive, are still vibrant thanks to the desert's dry air, preserving these moments from a world long gone. What makes these paintings so gripping is their sense of purpose. These weren't random sketches, they were deliberate, created with skill and meaning. The roundhead figures in particular stand out because they're so different from later art, like the cattle herding scenes of the Bovidian period. They're older, dating to around 10,000, 8,000 years ago when the Sahara was at its greenest. The artists used natural pigments, ochre, charcoal, clay mixed with water or animal fat, applied with fingers, brushes made of reeds, or even blown through hollow bones for a spray effect. The scale varies. Some figures are life-sized, others tiny, tucked into corners like secrets. And the settings, caves, overhangs, rock shelters, suggest these were sacred spaces, places where people gathered to tell stories, honor spirits, or mark important moments. But here's the part that hits me hard, the part that makes this feel so human and so mysterious. Who were these people, and what were they trying to say? Were the roundhead figures their gods, their ancestors, or something else entirely? The ritual scenes, dances, offerings, gatherings, hint at a culture with complex beliefs, maybe a spiritual world as rich as any we know. Were they praying for rain, celebrating celebrating a successful hunt, or connecting with something beyond the physical? And why do some figures look so strange, with helmets and floating poses that don't quite fit a Neolithic lifestyle? If you're like me, these questions are what keep you up at night, wondering what truths these paintings hold. They're not just art, they're a glimpse into a civilization we've lost, a culture that thrived in a Sahara that's now just sand. This is where the debate gets wild, and we're about to dive into it. Are these figures depictions of ancestors, spirits, or something stranger like extraterrestrial visitors? Yeah, I know, that sounds out there, but these paintings have sparked some crazy theories. In the next part, we'll pit mainstream archaeology against the wilder ideas, trying to make sense of what these images mean. Alright everybody, we're back in the caves of Tassili Najer, standing before paintings that feel like they're staring right through us. These ancient artworks, created in a green Sahara thousands of years ago, are haunting, especially the humanoid figures with round heads, helmet-like shapes, and scenes that look like rituals from another world. If you're like me, these images spark a mix of awe and curiosity, making you wonder what the artists were trying to tell us. Were they painting their daily lives, their gods, or something stranger? In this part, we're diving into the battle over what these paintings mean, pitting mainstream archaeology against some of the wilder, pseudo-archaeological ideas out there. It's a clash of science and speculation, and trust me, it's going to get your brain buzzing. Let's step into this debate and see if we can decode the enigma of Tassili's art. Let's start with the mainstream view, because archaeologists have spent decades piecing together what these paintings represent. The consensus is that the Tassili Najer artworks, dating from 12,000 to 4,000 years ago, are a record of Neolithic life in the Green Sahara. The round-head figures from the earliest period around 10,000 to 8,000 years ago are thought to depict humans, likely shamans, leaders, or mythological figures engaged in spiritual or ceremonial activities. The helmets, or round heads, could be stylized representations of human heads, possibly adorned with ceremonial headgear or body paint. In 2010, a study by the University of Bristol analyzed the pigments and context of these paintings, concluding that the round head figures likely represent ritual dancers or priests, their exaggerated features symbolizing spiritual power. The floating poses may be a depiction of trance states or symbolic ascents to a spirit world, common in shamanic cultures. The wavy lines around some figures could represent water, rain, or spiritual energy, tying into the Sahara's watery past. The ritual scenes, dancing women, figures with staffs, or groups gathered around animals are seen as glimpses of social and religious life. Archaeologists point to parallels in other African cultures, like the San people of southern Africa, whose rock art also depicts trance dances and spiritual beings. At sites like Jabaran, where women with geometric patterns dance in a circle, researchers suggest these could be fertility rites or harvest celebration, reflecting the Sahara's shift from hunting to herding. The great god figure at Sefar, with its horned or helmeted head, might represent a deity or ancestor, a common motif in early societies. In 2015, a team from the University of Cambridge noted similarities between Tassili's art and later African traditions, like masks used in West African ceremonies, suggesting a cultural continuity that stretched across millennia. These interpretations ground the paintings in human experience, people expressing their beliefs, fears, and hopes in a changing world. But here's where things get wild, and if you're like me, this is where your skeptic's radar starts pinging. Pseudo-archaeologists think ancient aliens enthusiasts have a very different take. They look at the round head figures, with their helmet-like heads and floating poses, and see something extraterrestrial. The idea kicked off in the 1960s when Henri Lotte, the French ethnologist who popularized Tassili's art, suggested some figures resembled Martians or spacemen. His comments were partly tongue-in-cheek, but they lit a fire. By the 1970s, authors like Erich von Däniken, in books like Chariots of the Gods, argued that the helmeted figures were depictions of alien visitors, their round heads representing helmets or spacesuits. The floating figures? Astronauts in zero gravity or beings from another world. The wavy lines? Energy fields or spacecraft exhaust. Proponents point to specific paintings, like the Great God or the Tin Tazarift figure, claiming their suits and antennas look too advanced for Neolithic people. This theory has been amplified online, with YouTube videos and blogs claiming Tassili's art is evidence of ancient extraterrestrial contact. They argue that the Sahara's isolation and the painting's age, predating known civilizations, make it a perfect spot for aliens to visit early humans. Some even tie it to the Atlantis myth, suggesting a lost, advanced civilization taught by extraterrestrials, but here's the reality check. There's no hard evidence for this. No metal artifacts, no technological remains, nothing to suggest anything beyond Neolithic tools and pigments. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these ideas as pareidolia, our tendency to see familiar patterns like spacesuits in abstract images. A 2018 study in Antiquity magazine analyzed the painting, chemical composition, and found they were made with local materials: ochre, charcoal, clay, not some alien tech. The pseudo-archaeological view thrives because it's exciting. It taps into our love for mystery and the unknown, but it also risks overshadowing the human story. The Tassili artists weren't painting aliens, they were painting their world, their gods, their rituals, their dreams. The mainstream view, while less sensational, is grounded in context. These people lived in a green Sahara, facing a changing climate, and their art reflects their struggle to make sense of it. Still, I get why the alien theory is tempting. Those roundhead figures are weird, and if you're like me, you can't help but wonder if there's more to the story. Could these paintings hold a truth we haven't grasped yet, or are they just the product of a vibrant human imagination? This debate is what makes Tassili N'Ajjer so captivating. It's a battle between what we know and what we dream. The paintings are a bridge to a lost civilization, but they're also a mirror, reflecting our own need to find meaning in the past. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the cultural context of these artworks and why they matter, not just as art, but as a legacy of a people we've almost forgotten. If you're ready to keep unraveling this mystery, stick with me. Tassili N'Ajjer, this rugged plateau in southeastern Algeria, was a vibrant hub 12,000 to 4,000 years ago, during the African humid period. Back then, the Sahara was alive with rivers, lakes, and grasslands, supporting communities of hunters, fishers, and early herders. The paintings, over 15,000 of them, scattered across thousands of caves and rock shelters, capture this world in stunning detail. They show hunters chasing antelope, women gathering plants, and herders guiding cattle, but also stranger scenes, humanoid figures with round heads, ritual dances, and what might be gods or spirits. These artworks, created with natural pigments like ochre and charcoal, weren't just decoration. They were a way for these people to make sense of their world, to record their lives, and to connect with something bigger. In a place where survival depended on water and game, these paintings were a lifeline to their culture, their identity. The cultural context of these paintings is rooted in the Neolithic Sahara, a time of transition. Early on, around 12,000, 8,000 years ago, the Roundhead period shows a society of hunter-gatherers, likely nomadic, who relied on the abundant game and water. Their art, with its ethereal figures and ritual scenes, suggests a spiritual world rich with meaning. Archaeologists believe these people practiced shamanism or animism, seeing spirits in the landscape, rivers, animals, even the cliffs themselves. The round-headed figures, often floating or adorned with patterns, might represent shamans in trance, connecting with ancestors or deities. A 2013 study from the University of Oxford compared Tassili's art to shamanic traditions in southern Africa, noting similarities in how both depict altered states of consciousness. The dances and ceremonies painted on these walls could have been ways to ensure a good hunt, bring rain, or honor the dead. As the Sahara began to dry around 7,000 years ago, the art shifts to the Bovidian period, reflecting a new way of life, cattle herding. Paintings of cows, herders, and milkers dominate, showing a pastoral society adapting to a changing climate. These scenes aren't just practical, they're deeply symbolic. Cattle were wealth, status, and survival, and their depiction suggests rituals tied to fertility or prosperity. At sites like Jabarin, paintings of women dancing with geometric patterns might represent fertility rites, ensuring the health of herds or the community. A 2017 analysis in Journal of Archaeological Science found that some pigments were sourced from distant regions, hinting at trade networks that carried not just goods but ideas and beliefs across the Sahara. This art was a shared language, binding communities together as their world grew harsher. The artistic significance of Tassili's paintings lies in their beauty and complexity. These weren't crude sketches, they were crafted with skill and intention. Artists mixed pigments with water or fat, using fingers, reed brushes, or even spraying techniques to create dynamic scenes. Some paintings are massive, covering entire cave walls, while others are tiny, hidden in crevices like private prayers. The colors, reds, yellows, whites, still pop after millennia, preserved by the desert's dry air. The figures are expressive, hunters crouch with precision, animals leap with lifelike energy, and ritual scenes pulse with movement. This wasn't art for art's sake, it was a way to tell stories, preserve knowledge, and assert a place in a changing world. A 2019 study from the University of Algiers noted that the painting's placement in caves and shelters suggests sacred spaces where communities gathered for ceremonies or storytelling. But here's the part that gets me, the part that makes this story feel so human and so tragic. These paintings are all that's left of a people who faced the end of their world. As the Sahara dried up around 5,000 years ago, their rivers vanished, their grasslands turned to dust, and their communities were forced to move or perish. The art stops abruptly, the caves abandoned, the stories silenced. Yet these paintings endure, a testament to a culture that refused to be forgotten. They're not just images, they're a legacy, a cry across millennia saying, "We were here." If you're like me, that thought hits hard. It makes you wonder about the people who painted these walls, their joys, their fears, their hopes. Were they praying for their world to survive? Did they know it was slipping away? This is where Tassili Najer becomes more than art. It's a mirror for our own time. These people lived through a climate catastrophe, just as we're grappling with our own. Their paintings remind us how fragile our world is, how easily a civilization can fade. But they also show us resilience, creativity, and the human need to leave a mark. As we move into the next chapter, we're going to follow these people's descendants to the edges of the Sahara, where a forgotten empire, the Garamantes, built pyramids and cities in the desert. If you're ready to keep chasing this story, stick with me. It's about to get even more epic. We're deep in the Sahara, chasing the echoes of a world that vanished when the sands took over. Picture this, a sprawling empire in the heart of what's now one of the driest places on Earth, where people built cities, pyramids, and a way of life that defied the desert itself. This is the story of the Garamantes, a civilization that thrived in Libya's Fezzan region thousands of years ago. A people so remarkable they traded with the Romans and carved out a kingdom in a land that seems impossible to tame. If you're like me, the kind of person who gets chills thinking about a forgotten empire rising from the sand, then you're in for a treat. In this part, we're introducing the Garamantes, their world, their ingenuity, and their mystery. Let's dive into this lost kingdom and see what made them the lords of the sand. The Garamantes lived in what's now southwestern Libya, centered in the Fezzan, a region of brutal desert punctuated by oases and rocky plateaus. From around 1000 BCE to 700 CE, they built a civilization that was unlike anything else in the Sahara. While the green Sahara of 10,000 years ago was long gone, replaced by arid dunes, the Garamantes found a way to thrive. Their capital, Garama, modern-day Jarma, was a bustling hub with stone buildings, markets, and even small pyramids that still stand today. Unlike the Neolithic nomads who painted the Tassili caves, the Garamantes were a settled society, with a complex culture that left behind tangible ruin. They weren't just surviving, they were ruling a desert empire, connecting distant lands and defying the odds in a place where water was worth more than gold. What makes the Garamantes so fascinating is how they turned a hostile landscape into a thriving homeland. The Fezzan wasn't completely dry. Underground aquifers, fed by ancient rains, lay beneath the surface. The Garamantes tapped into these with a network of wells and channels, creating oases that supported agriculture. They grew dates, figs, and grains like barley, sustaining a population that some estimates put at 50,000 at its peak. Archaeological digs at Garama have uncovered stone foundations, pottery, and jewelry, showing a society with wealth and craftsmanship. They buried their dead in tombs, some marked by small, stepped pyramids, a nod to their sophistication and perhaps a link to distant cultures like Egypt. A 2011 excavation by the University of Leicester found evidence of multi-room houses and workshops, suggesting a city with specialized labor blacksmiths, potters, maybe even scribes. The Garamantes weren't isolated desert dwellers. They were players on a bigger stage. Their territory sat at a crossroads, linking sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean. They traded with the Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and later the Romans, exchanging goods like salt, gold, and possibly enslaved people for wine, olive oil, and ceramics. Roman texts, like those of historian Pliny the Elder, describe the Garamantes as a fierce, chariot-driving people who raided their neighbors but also built a prosperous kingdom. Archaeological finds back this up. Roman-style pottery and glass beads have been found in Garamantian sites, proof of long-distance trade. Their chariots, depicted in rock art, weren't just for war. They were likely used to navigate trade routes across the Sahara, connecting oases like beads on a string. But here's the part that gets me, the part that makes this story feel so human and so haunting. The Garamantes built all this in a place where survival was a daily battle. They weren't just adapting to the desert, they were mastering it, turning sand into a kingdom. Yet, their story was almost lost. For centuries, European historians dismissed them as a minor tribe, overshadowed by Rome or Egypt. It wasn't until modern archaeology, starting with Italian excavations in the 1930s and ramping up in the 2000s, that we realized how wrong that was. The Garamantes were a powerhouse, a civilization that rivaled their neighbors in ingenuity and ambition. If you're like me, that realization hits hard. It's a reminder of how easily history can forget even the greatest of empires. This is just the beginning of the Garamantes story, and it's already mind-blowing. They weren't just a footnote, they were lords of the sand, building a civilization that laughed in the face of the desert. In the next part, we're going to dive into their incredible irrigation systems and their trade with Rome, which made them a force to be reckoned with. If you're ready to see how they tamed the Sahara, stick with me. This is about to get even more epic, where the Garamantes built an empire that laughed in the face of the desert's brutality. Picture a civilization in what's now Libya's Fezzan region, turning sand into farmland and connecting with one of the greatest powers of the ancient world, Rome. If you're like me, the idea of people thriving in a place this harsh, trading across continents while mastering their environment, is nothing short of awe-inspiring. In this part, we're diving into the Garamantes' incredible irrigation systems that made their desert bloom and their trade networks that linked them to the Roman Empire. This is the story of how they became lords of the sand, and trust me, it's going to blow your mind. Let's jump in and see how they pulled it off. The Sahara in the Garamantes' time, from 1000 BCE to 700 CE, was a far cry from the green paradise of 10,000 years ago. The African humid period was over, leaving a landscape of dunes and rocky plateaus. But beneath the surface lay a secret weapon: underground aquifers, vast reservoirs of water trapped from ancient rain. The Garamantes tapped into these with a genius system called Fagara or Kanat, underground channels that carried water from aquifers to their fields. These weren't just ditches, they were engineering marvels, some stretching over 10 miles, dug by hand through rock and sand. A 2013 study by the University of Leicester mapped over 1,600 miles of these channels in the Fezzan, enough to irrigate thousands of acres. The Garamantes used them to grow dates, figs, grapes, and grains like wheat and barley, turning oases into thriving farmlands that fed cities like Garama, their capital. Building and maintaining these channels was no small feat. The Fagara required constant upkeep to prevent collapse or clogging, and they were sloped precisely to ensure steady water flow. Archaeologists have found evidence of ventilation shafts and access wells, showing a level of engineering that rivals anything in the ancient world. At sites like Zinchekra, a Garamantian stronghold, excavations uncovered clay pipes and stone-lined channels, some still intact after 2,000 years. This wasn't just about survival, it was about creating abundance in a place where nature offered none. The Garamantes fields supported a population of tens of thousands, with surplus crops likely traded or stored. If you're like me, that kind of ingenuity in the face of such odds feels like a testament to human resilience. But the Garamantes weren't just farming geniuses, they were master traders, linking the Sahara to the Mediterranean and beyond. Their location in the Fezzan made them middlemen in a vast network connecting sub-Saharan Africa to the Roman Empire. From the 1st century BCE, they traded goods like salt, gold, ivory, and possibly enslaved people, receiving Roman wine, olive oil, ceramics, and glass beads in return. Roman historian Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, described the Garamantes as a powerful people who used chariots to dominate trade routes. Archaeological finds back this up. At Garama, excavators have uncovered Roman amphorae, glassware, and even coins, proof of a thriving exchange. The Garamantes' trade routes were a lifeline, stretching across the Sahara to oases like Gat and Merzuk, and north to the Mediterranean via Tripoli. Rock art in the Fezzan shows chariots racing across the desert, likely used to transport goods over long distances. These routes weren't just paths, they were arteries of commerce and culture, carrying ideas as well as cargo. The Garamantes likely interacted with Berber tribes, sub-Saharan kingdoms, and even early Egyptian communities, blending influences into their own unique culture. Their pottery, for example, shows a mix of local and Mediterranean styles, hinting at a cosmopolitan society. It's mind-boggling to think of this desert empire as a hub of global trade, connecting worlds in a time when the Sahara was a barrier most couldn't cross. Here's the part that hits me hard, the part that makes this story so human. The Garamantes didn't just survive the desert, they shaped it, bending one of the harshest environments on Earth to their will. Their Fagara systems and trade networks weren't just practical, they were acts of defiance, proof that human ingenuity could thrive where nature said no. But their story, like so much of the Sahara's past, was nearly lost, buried under sand and time. If you're like me, that thought lingers, a civilization this remarkable, almost forgotten. In the next part, we'll explore how the Garamantes were rediscovered and why their legacy was erased for so long. If you're ready to keep chasing this epic story, stick with me. It's about to get even deeper. Garamantes built a remarkable empire that defied the desert with ingenious irrigation and far-reaching trade. These lords of the sand created cities, grew crops, and traded with Rome, leaving behind pyramids and ruins that whisper of their greatness. But here's the part that gets me, the part that feels like a twist of fate. For centuries, their story was almost completely forgotten, buried not just by sand, but by history itself. If you're like me, the idea of a civilization this incredible fading into obscurity makes your heart ache. In this part, we're diving into how the Garamantes were rediscovered and why their legacy was erased for so long. This is a tale of lost history and the fight to bring it back. Let's uncover it together. The Garamantes thrived in Libya's Fezzan region from around 1000 BCE to 700 CE, their capital Garama, a hub of agriculture and trade. Yet, after their decline, they slipped from the world's memory. Roman historians like Pliny the Elder and Herodotus mention them, but often as barbarians or chariot-riding raiders, not as the sophisticated society we now know they were. By the Middle Ages, their cities were abandoned, their irrigation channels clogged with sand, and their story faded into myth. European scholars, focused on Rome or Egypt, dismissed the Sahara as a cultural backwater, assuming no great civilization could exist in such a harsh land. The Garamantes were reduced to a footnote, their pyramids mistaken for natural formations, their legacy buried under centuries of misunderstanding. The rediscovery of the Garamantes began in the early 20th century, thanks to Italian archaeologists working in Libya during the colonial period. In the 1930s, teams led by Antonio Frova excavated sites near Jarma, uncovering stone buildings, tombs, and those small stepped pyramids that screamed civilization. It wasn't until the 1990s and 2000s that the Garamantes got their due, thanks to modern archaeology. A 2001-2011 project by the University of Leicester, led by David Mattingly, revolutionized our understanding. Using satellite imagery, ground surveys, and excavations, they mapped Garama's urban layout, streets, houses, workshops, and confirmed the vast Foggara irrigation network, stretching over 1,600 miles. This wasn't a tribe, it was an empire. These discoveries painted a new picture. The Garamantes were a powerhouse, with a complex society that rivaled their Mediterranean neighbors. They had writing, Libico-Berber script found on some stones, though no full texts survive. Their tombs, with offerings like ostrich eggs and imported ceramics, show a culture with rich burial tradition. But the rediscovery faced challenges. Libya's political instability, especially after 2011, made fieldwork dangerous, halting many excavations. Funding was another hurdle. The Sahara's remoteness and harsh conditions make digs expensive, and most archaeological money goes to flashier sites like Rome or Giza. Despite this, every find, a coin, a Foggara shaft, a pyramid adds to the Garamantes' story, proving they were no footnote. So why was their legacy erased for so long? Part of it was bias. Colonial-era scholars often viewed African civilizations through a lens of prejudice, assuming they couldn't match the great empires of Europe or the Near East. The Garamantes, as the Saharan people, were dismissed as primitive, their achievements ignored. Even Roman accounts, our main written sources, were skewed, portraying them as raiders rather than partners in trade. Environmental factors didn't help. As the Sahara grew drier, the Garamantes' aquifers depleted, and by 700 CE, their cities were unsustainable. Sand buried their works, and without written records, their story faded. A 2019 study in Antiquity magazine noted that the lack of decipherable texts, unlike Egypt's hieroglyphs, left the Garamantes vulnerable to historical erasure, their culture surviving only in fragments. This is where the story hits me hard, and if you're like me, it's a gut punch. The Garamantes built an empire against all odds, only to be forgotten because of bias, environment, and time. Their rediscovery is a triumph, but it's also a reminder of how much we've lost, how many other stories lie buried in the Sahara's sand. As we move into the next chapter, we'll explore the stone circles and astronomical alignments that hint at even older Saharan cultures, ones that might have inspired the Garamantes. If you're ready to keep chasing these ghosts, stick with me.